The snow came down sideways the night I learned what my own children thought I was worth. I was sitting on a metal bench inside the old Worcester bus terminal, the kind of place where the heat works in some corners and not others, and I had picked the wrong corner. My coat was the good wool one I bought in 1998 at a Filene's basement that doesn't exist anymore, and even that wasn't enough. My feet had stopped feeling like feet about an hour earlier. I kept wiggling my toes inside my shoes the way the school nurse used to tell the kids to do on field trips in January, and I remember thinking, isn't that something? 41 years teaching second grade, and the last useful thing I learned on the job was how to keep my own toes from going black on a bench in Massachusetts. My name is Marjorie Whitcomb. I'm 73 years old. I taught at Pine Hollow Elementary in Springfield from 1979 until I retired in 2020, and I have a pension that should have been enough to keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. I'm telling you that right at the start because I know what people think when they hear an old woman ended up homeless. They think she must have made bad choices. They think she must have been a drinker, or careless with money, or one of those people who never plans. I planned my whole life. I had a 403B. I had a house in East Longmeadow that was paid off in 2014. I had a Honda Civic with 62,000 miles on it. And on the night I'm telling you about, I had $11 and a Walgreens bag with 2 changes of underwear, my reading glasses, my late husband's wedding ring on a chain, and a photograph of my mother holding me on the day I was baptized. That was it. That was what was left of 73 years. I want to tell you how I got there because I think a lot of women my age are closer to that bench than they want to admit, and I want them to hear me. My husband, Dale, passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 9 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral. We had 2 children, a son named Travis and a daughter named Renee. Travis was 46 at the time, an insurance adjuster in Hartford, married to a woman named Bridget, who I had spent 22 years trying to like. Renee was 44, divorced twice, working part-time at a chiropractor's office in West Springfield, with a 16-year-old boy named Cody, whom I loved more than was probably healthy because he was the only grandchild I had. After Dale died, I rattled around that house for almost 3 years. 5 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a finished basement. Dale had panelled himself in 1991. It was too much house. I knew it. The driveway alone in the winter was more than I could handle, and I'd already had one fall on the back steps that scared the daylights out of me. I started telling the kids I was thinking about selling. Maybe a condo, I said. Maybe one of those over 55 communities out by the Hollyoak line. That's when Travis came over with a yellow legal pad. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he ate his Cheerios in 1985, and he laid out what he called a smart move. The smart move, according to my son, was that I would deed the house to him and Bridget. They would take over the property taxes and the maintenance. I would have a life estate, meaning I could live there as long as I wanted, and when I was ready, they would help me find the right place. The benefit, he said, was that we'd avoid probate, avoid Medicaid spend-down rules in case I ever needed nursing care, and keep the house in the family for Cody someday. I want you to hear me very clearly on this part. I am not a stupid woman. I have a master's degree from Westfield State. I balanced my own checkbook for 51 years. I read the ARP magazine cover to cover every month. I knew what a transfer on death deed was. I knew what an irrevocable trust was. I had even, at one point, sat down with a lawyer named Phil Mancuso to talk about my estate. But Phil Mancuso retired in 2021 and Dale was gone, and Travis sat at my kitchen table with that yellow legal pad and his father's eyes, and he said, "Mum, I've got you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, just like Dad would have wanted." I signed the deed in March of 2023. You can already see where this is going. I know you can. But I want you to understand that it didn't happen all at once. It happened so slowly that for almost a year I told myself I was imagining it. First it was the thermostat. Bridget came over one Sunday and said the heating bill was getting out of hand, and would I mind keeping it at 64 during the day? I said, of course, dear. I have sweaters. Then it was the freezer in the basement. They needed it for Cody's hockey meet, Bridget said, whatever that meant. And could they take it? I said, of course. Then it was Dale's workshop in the garage. Travis wanted to clear it out. Donate the tools. Make room for Bridget's car in the winter. I said, okay, but I cried about it that night, alone, in a house that was supposedly still my home. Then Renee moved in. Renee had lost her apartment in Shikopi. She showed up on a Tuesday in October with 2 trash bags of clothes and a story about a landlord who'd raised the rent on her without notice. I didn't ask questions. She was my daughter. I made up the guest room. I bought the cereal she liked. I drove her to her shifts at the chiropractor's because her car had a bad alternator and she couldn't afford to fix it. Cody came over on weekends. That part was nice. That part I'd take back if I could. Things got hard around Christmas. Renee and Travis started fighting in my living room about money. Real fights, the kind where Renee would say things like, "You've always been Mum's favorite," and Travis would say things like, "Maybe if you'd held down a job for more than 6 months at a time." I'd go into the kitchen and run water in the sink so I didn't have to hear it. Then in February, Bridget came over alone, and she sat in my recliner like she owned it. Which I suppose she did. And she said, "Marjorie, we need to have a serious conversation about your future." That phrase, your future, from a woman 30 years younger than me who hadn't called me mum once in 22 years of marriage. She said the house was too much for me. She said Travis was worried sick. She said they'd found a wonderful place in Shikopi, a residence for active seniors, and they'd already put down a deposit. The place was called Maplewood Gardens. The brochure was glossy. There was a picture of an old woman doing Tai Chi in a sunroom. I said I wanted to think about it. She said there wasn't really time to think about it, because the deposit was non-refundable, and the room they'd reserved would go to someone else by the end of the week. I said I wanted to call my lawyer. She said, "Marjorie, the house isn't yours anymore. You signed it over a year ago. You don't need a lawyer. I want to tell you what I did in that moment, but I'm not proud of it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I went very, very quiet, the way I used to go quiet in faculty meetings, when the principal said something I knew was wrong but didn't have the energy to fight. I nodded. I said I'd think about it. That night I called Travis. He didn't pick up. I called Renee on her cell phone, and she was downstairs in my own basement, and she said, "Mum, I can't talk right now. I've got a migraine." I sat in Dale's old chair in the den and I looked at our wedding picture on the bookshelf, and for the first time in 53 years I was glad he was dead. I was glad he didn't have to see this. The Maplewood Gardens visit was on a Saturday. Travis drove me. Bridget came along. The place wasn't terrible, on the surface. It was clean. The food smelled like food. But the room they'd reserved for me was a single 11 feet by 14, with a window looking out at a parking lot, and a vinyl floor that smelled like antiseptic. The director, a woman named Kayla who couldn't have been more than 30, kept calling me sweetheart. On the ride home, Travis told me they'd already arranged for an estate sale company to come through the house the following weekend. They'd handle everything. I wouldn't have to lift a finger. They'd selected a few pieces to keep in the family, including, he said, my mother's china cabinet, which Bridget had always loved. My mother's china cabinet, Bridget had always loved. I asked what would happen to my things. Travis said, "Mum, you can't bring much. The room is small. We'll keep what we can. The rest we'll donate or sell. It's better this way. Cleaner." I said, "When exactly am I supposed to move?" He said, "Next Friday." That gave me 6 days to dismantle 73 years of life. I want to tell you that I fought. I want to tell you that I called a lawyer, that I stood my ground, that I demanded a hearing or a meeting or anything at all. I didn't. I went home and I packed 2 suitcases. I packed photographs because I could fit photographs. I packed Dale's wedding ring on its chain. I packed the baptism picture of my mother. I packed my reading glasses and 3 books and a sweater my sister Doreen had knitted me one Christmas in the 80s. I want to tell you about my sister Doreen now, because she's the reason I'm here at all. Doreen is 4 years older than me. She left home at 17 and never really came back. Our father was a hard man, the kind of hard that I won't describe in detail, because describing it doesn't help anyone, and Doreen took the worst of it. She got out the second she could. She went to nursing school in Boston, then to Houston for an oil company medical job in the 70s. And somewhere along the way, she met a Norwegian engineer named Lars Bergstrom, and they made an unholy amount of money in offshore drilling consulting. They never had children. Lars passed in 2017. Doreen was, by my best estimate, worth somewhere between $40 and $60 million. Though I'd never asked, and she'd never said. Doreen and I had a falling out in 1994. It was about our father's funeral. She didn't come. I said unforgivable things to her on the phone, and she said unforgivable things back, and we didn't speak for almost 30 years. She found me the way you find anyone in 2024. Cody told her. I didn't know that at the time. I found out later that Cody, my 16-year-old grandson, had a Facebook account, and so did Doreen, and Cody had messaged his great-aunt one night in March to say his grandma was being moved into a home, and he was worried about her. I'll thank that boy for the rest of my life. But on the night at the bus terminal, I didn't know any of that. What had happened, in the 8 days between Maplewood Gardens and that bench, was this. I had moved into my 11 by 14 room on a Friday. By the following Wednesday, had figured out that the monthly fee at Maplewood Gardens was $3,800, and that Travis had set up automatic withdrawal from my checking account, and that he had also, somewhere in the paperwork I'd signed at the front desk, become my designated financial agent. I was not allowed to leave the facility unaccompanied. My phone calls went through the front desk. The Wi-Fi password was changed weekly, and I wasn't given the new one. On Thursday morning, I walked out the front door behind a delivery man with a stack of Amazon boxes, and I kept walking. I had my purse, I had $11 cash and a credit card I wasn't sure was still active, and I had no plan. I took a bus to downtown Springfield. I took another bus to Worcester, because Worcester was the farthest place the $11 would take me, and because I didn't want to be in any town where my children might think to look. I planned to call my old friend Eunice in Maine in the morning. I just needed to get through one night. That's how I ended up on the bench. A little after 1 in the morning, a woman in a long camel coat sat down next to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat there. I assumed she was waiting for a bus. Then she said, very quietly, "Marjorie." I turned and looked at her. She had my mother's chin. She had our father's eyes, the bad ones. But she had my mother's chin. And it had been 30 years, but I knew her in the half-second it took her to say my name. She said, "I'm so sorry it took me this long. I want to tell you I said something dignified. I want to tell you I held my composure. I didn't. I cried in a way I had not cried since Dale's funeral, and probably not even then. I cried like a child. My sister put her arm around me and she smelled like a perfume I didn't recognize, something expensive, and she just held on. She held on for a long time. She told me on the drive to the hotel that night that Cody had messaged her 3 weeks earlier, that she'd hired a private investigator the same day, that the investigator had tracked me to Maplewood Gardens within 48 hours, and that Doreen had been waiting for me to make a move on my own, because she didn't want to come crashing in if I'd actually wanted to be there. When I walked out the front door behind the Amazon man, the investigator had been across the street in a parked car. He had followed me to the Springfield bus station. He had followed me to Worcester. He had called Doreen at her hotel in Boston the moment I sat down on that bench, and she had driven the 70 miles to come get me herself. She didn't ask me what had happened. She didn't want me to have to say it out loud yet. She put me in a room at a hotel I'd only ever read about in magazines, the kind of place with a doorman and a robe waiting on the bed, and she sat with me until I fell asleep, which didn't take long, because I hadn't slept in 3 days. In the morning, room service brought eggs and toast, and Doreen sat across from me at a little table by the window, and she said, "Here is what's going to happen." She had already, by that morning, done the following things. She had retained a lawyer in Springfield named Patricia Donnelly, who specialized in elder financial abuse. She had retained a forensic accountant. She had pulled my credit report, with my permission, on her phone right there at the breakfast table. She had identified 2 credit cards opened in my name that I had never seen, both with balances, both with payments being made on time from my own checking account. She had identified a home equity line of credit on the East Longmeadow house, opened in November of 2023, with a balance of $170,000. The house, of course, was no longer in my name, but the line of credit was. She also told me she had purchased that morning a condominium in a building on the harbour in Portland, Maine. 3 bedrooms, ocean view, 11th floor in a building with a doorman and keycard elevators that only stop at the floors you're authorized to access. She showed me pictures on her phone. The kitchen had white cabinets and a window over the sink, which I had wanted my whole life and never had. She said, "The condo is yours. It is held in a trust called the Rosewood Heritage Trust. You are the sole beneficiary during your lifetime. The trustee is a fiduciary at a private bank in Boston, not me, because I want you to know nobody can take this from you, including me, including a future husband I might marry, including anyone. The condo cannot be sold without the trustee's approval. It cannot be borrowed against. Your name is not on any deed that anyone can find through a public record search." She slid a folder across the table. She said, "There is also $7 million, also in trust, also untouchable. The trust pays you $16,000 a month for the rest of your life, indexed for inflation, and any extraordinary medical or housing expenses come out of the principal at the trustee's discretion. When you pass, whatever is left goes to whoever you name. Cody, if you want. A scholarship fund. A dog rescue. It's yours to decide." I looked at her and I said, "Doreen, I can't." She said, "You can. You will." I should have done this 30 years ago. Lars used to ask me, "Why don't you call your sister?" And I'd say, "You don't understand." And he'd say, "Doreen, life is short," and I didn't listen. And now Lars is gone, and our father is gone, and our mother is gone, and there is just you and me, and I will not waste another minute being too proud to do this. I want to tell you I argued with her. I did argue a little, but not for long, because she was right. And because I was tired, we drove to Portland that afternoon. I saw the condo for the first time on a Saturday in April, with the sun coming off the water and a man named Marcus at the front desk who already knew my name. The first thing I did when I walked in was sit on the floor in the empty living room and cry again, but a different kind of cry this time. Doreen sat on the floor next to me. She was 77 years old, in a cashmere coat, sitting on a hardwood floor in a condo she'd just bought for her sister, and she was laughing. I lived alone in that condo for almost 6 weeks before my children found me. I want to tell you how they found me, because I want you to understand the kind of people they had become. They didn't find me through a missing persons report. They didn't file one. The forensic accountant Doreen had hired discovered that Travis had not, in fact, reported me missing after I walked out of Maplewood Gardens. He had told the staff I was being moved to a memory care facility and had paid out the remainder of the month. He had continued the automatic withdrawals from my checking account. He had, as far as the world knew, simply quietly relocated his elderly mother somewhere else. They found me because Cody told them. I had called Cody after about a month from a new phone Doreen had bought me. I told him where I was. I told him I was safe. I told him I loved him and I would see him soon, and that he should not, under any circumstances, tell his mother or his uncle. He said okay. He cried. He was 16 years old, and he had been carrying things he should not have been carrying. But he was 16, and his mother was his mother. And one night in late May, Renee got into his phone while he was in the shower, and that was that. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had called up first, the way he was supposed to. He said, "Mrs. Burst, Whitcomb, I have a Travis and a Renee Whitcomb here. They say they're your children. Do you want me to send them up?" I sat in my kitchen, in the white cabinet kitchen with the window over the sink, and I thought about it for a full minute. I said, "Send them up. But Marcus, if I call down in the next 30 minutes, I want you to call the police." He said, "Yes, Mom. I'd like to tell you they came in screaming." They didn't. They came in carrying a bouquet of pink peonies wrapped in brown paper, the kind from a real florist, not a grocery store, and Renee had been crying, or had made herself look like she'd been crying, which is a thing my daughter has been able to do since she was 4 years old. Travis was wearing a tie. He never wore a tie unless he wanted something. He hugged me. I let him. He smelled like his father's old aftershave, which I knew he'd started using on purpose after Dale died, and I felt something in me harden. Renee said, "Mum, we have been worried sick." I said, "Have you?" Travis said, "We didn't know where you were. Why didn't you call us?" We thought something terrible had happened. I said, something terrible did happen. There was a silence then, a real one. The kind where everyone in the room knows what is being said, even though nobody is saying it. Renee started crying for real, or what looked like real. She said, "Mum, we made mistakes. We know we made mistakes." Bridget pushed Travis into all of it. You know how she is. And I was in such a bad place after my divorce. And we wanted what was best for you. And it got out of hand. Travis said, "We want to make it right." I said, "How?" Travis said, "Well, we've been talking, and we think the best thing would be for you to come home. To the house. We'll move out of the master bedroom. We'll give you the whole upstairs. You'll have your independence. And we can start fresh. As a family." He paused. He said, "Also, we should probably talk about, the financial side. Aunt Doreen reached out to us last week through a lawyer. We didn't even know you were in touch with her. She said something about a trust, and we just want to understand what's happening. Because if something happens to you, God forbid, we want to make sure things are handled right." I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the peonies which they had set on my counter without asking where the vases were, because they didn't know, because they had never been in this kitchen before. I said, "Sit down." They sat. I said, "I want to tell you both something, and I want you to listen, because I am only going to say it once." I said, "When you put me in that room at Maplewood Gardens, I weighed 112 pounds. I had not slept through the night in 8 months. I sat on a bench at a bus station in Worcester with $11 in my purse, and I thought very seriously about walking out into the snow and not walking back. I am not going to tell you that for sympathy. I am telling you that so you understand the kind of mother you have, and the kind of mother you almost lost, and the kind of person who is now sitting across from you." I said, "I have had a lawyer named Patricia Donnelly looking at the paperwork you had me sign. The deed to the East Longmeadow house, the financial agent designation at Maplewood Gardens, the 2 credit cards you opened in my name, Travis, the home equity line of credit." His face did a thing I will remember for the rest of my life. It was the same thing it did when he was 7 years old and I caught him with the cookies. I said, "The lawyer tells me that elder financial abuse in the state of Massachusetts is a felony. The forensic accountant we hired tells me you've moved approximately $291,000 out of accounts in my name, between the home equity line, the credit cards, and certain transactions through my checking account that I did not authorize." Renee said, "Mum," I said, "I am not finished." I said, "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave this condo today, and you are not going to come back. Not for any reason. Not for Christmas. Not for emergencies. Not when I am dying. The doorman has your photographs. The building manager has your photographs. If you come back here, you will be removed." I said, "My lawyer has prepared a settlement agreement. You will sign it. In exchange for not pressing criminal charges, you will deed the East Longmeadow house back to me. You will pay back the $291,000 over a period of 7 years, with interest. You will have no further contact with me, financial or otherwise. If you fail to comply, the criminal complaint goes forward." Travis said, "Mom, this is insane. This is Aunt Doreen putting ideas in your head." I said, "Travis, Aunt Doreen did not put me on that bench. You did." He didn't have anything to say to that. I said, "One more thing. Cody. Cody is welcome here any time. He is welcome here for the rest of my life. The trust will pay for his college all 4 years, anywhere he gets in. That is between him and me. You will not touch a dollar of it. You will not interfere. If I find out you have punished him for being a better human being than either of you, I will revise my entire estate, and the only thing you will inherit from me is the rest of the bill." Renee was crying. Real crying this time, I think. Travis was looking at the floor. I said, "You can leave the flowers." They left. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I made a cup of tea. I called Doreen. I told her it was done. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Ask me tomorrow." That was almost 2 years ago now. Travis and Bridget sold their house and moved to Florida. They send me a check every month. The interest is calculated by Patricia Donnelly's office. I don't read the memo line. Renee is in a recovery program. I didn't know until later that part of what had been happening in those last months at the East Longmeadow house involved pills she'd been getting through one of those websites. She has been clean, by her own report and her sponsors, for 14 months. She writes me letters. I read them. I've not written back yet. I might. I don't know. Cody is a freshman at Boston University. He takes the train up to see me one weekend a month. He sleeps on the pull-out couch in the second bedroom, the one I keep for him, and we walk along the harbour and we don't always talk. And that's all right. He told me once that the night he messaged Doreen, he was scared he was going to make everything worse. I told him he saved my life, and I meant it the way you mean things when you only get to mean them once. Doreen and I talk every day, sometimes twice. She comes up from Boston every other weekend. She is teaching me how to use a smartphone properly, not just the way I'd been using it. We are slowly, carefully becoming the sisters we should have been all along. There is no making up the 30 years. There is only what we do now. I want to say one thing before I finish, and I want to say it to the women my age who are watching this. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. The day a child of yours sits down at your kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a plan that benefits them more than it benefits you, you call a lawyer. Not their lawyer, not the family lawyer, your own. You call her before you sign anything. You ask the question, what happens to me if this person I love stops loving me? And you do not sign until you have an answer in writing. You don't need a millionaire sister to protect yourself. I was lucky. I know I was lucky. But the things that protected me in the end, the trust, the trustee at the bank, the lawyer who knew elder law, the doorman who knew which faces to let upstairs and which to stop, these are things any woman can put in place at any income level, with the help of a state bar referral service and an honest hour of her own time. I lost almost everything before I learned that. I am asking you to learn it before you lose anything at all. The harbour is beautiful tonight. There's a fog coming in off the water, the soft kind, the kind that makes the lights of the boats look like they're floating in the air. Doreen is flying in tomorrow morning. Cody is coming up Friday. There are peonies on my counter, white ones that I bought myself. This is what I have. This is what is mine. And nobody, not anybody, is taking it from me again. I have thought a great deal, in the months since that Tuesday afternoon when I told my children to leave my kitchen, about how a person ends up on a bench in a bus station at 73 years old. It does not happen all at once. It happens the way a roof leaks. One small place, one small day, one small thing you tell yourself you will deal with later, and then one morning the ceiling is on the floor. I signed that deed in March of 2023 because I loved my son. That is the truth of it, and I am not going to dress it up. I loved Travis and I trusted him, and I told myself that trust between a mother and her child was the kind of trust you did not need to put in writing. I was wrong. I was not wrong to love him. I was wrong to confuse love with proof. Love is not a legal document. Love does not record itself at the county clerk's office. The hardest thing I have learned in my life is that you can love someone with everything you are and still need to protect yourself from what they might choose to do with that love. I think about Doreen every day now. 30 years we lost. 30 years because I said something at our father's funeral I should not have said. And she said something back. And neither of us was strong enough or wise enough or humble enough to pick up the phone first. The thing nobody tells you about pride is that pride does not feel like pride from the inside. From the inside, it feels like principle. It feels like dignity. It feels like the only thing you have left. It is not. The thing you have left is the people who would still answer if you called. Doreen would have answered. She told me so, that first night in the hotel. She had been waiting 30 years for me to call. I think about Cody too, 16 years old, carrying a thing nobody his age should ever have to carry. And he carried it anyway because he loved his grandmother and because his conscience would not let him do anything else. I have come to believe that character is mostly that. Not the grand moments, the small ones. The moment a teenager decides, alone in his bedroom on a Tuesday night, that he will type a message to a great aunt he has never met because something is wrong and he is the only one paying attention. I taught second grade for 41 years, and I will tell you That is what I was trying to grow in those children. Not readers, not test takers, people who would notice. So if you take anything from what I have told you, take this. Be the person who notices. Be the person who calls the lawyer before the legal pad comes out. Be the person who picks up the phone first before another 30 years go by. And when you have been knocked all the way down, the way I was, do not let pride or shame or exhaustion talk you out of standing back up. Stand up. Sign the papers. Walk into the kitchen. Tell them to leave. That is mine now. Nobody is taking it from me again.